Hello, everyone. Susan Hopkins here, and welcome back to the Self-Reg show. It's our podcast with Dr. Stuart Shanker, me, the MEHRIT Centre, Self-Reggers, and we talk about all things Self-Reg. So, good morning, Stuart. How are you?
I'm okay.
Tell people why you're okay. Many people will be able to relate as to the reason why that was an okay versus a great.
So I learned yesterday that we habituate very quickly to the smell of the smoke and then stupidly think that it's fine to be out there. Uh, so this morning, I spent too much time out there and a little bit of headaches today.
Yeah. So for folks, we're filming this, what's today, July 7th or 8th?
Eighth,
And, or I mean, May 7th or 8th. And it is, so for Canadians,
June, June.
yeah, June. Okay. So the smoke is affecting me too. It's the wildfires. And for those of you, I mean, I know Canada's making international news with these. We have wildfire season every year, but it's never been quite like this. And, the smoke is really affecting us. Where we live about an hour's drive apart, but it's pretty bad right now. But I'm always my brother's home in Nova Scotia, where I'm from originally. There are literally houses burned two on almost three sides of him that are 3 and 4 blocks away. Like that's less than a kilometer away. That's how close it came. So be thankful, right? It really is. And anyway, so that's why we're here. That's why there's a little bit of an energy impact. So it's so relevant to self-reg because that's a stressor, right? You've talked about environmental, the quality of air. Like people don't think, how is that tied to, if you want to say, outcomes? It is like there's some you've even written about some science around that
Yeah.
before, Stuart. Yeah, really, really interesting. Anyway, that's probably for another podcast because we are here today to talk to you about a blog that Stuart wrote about why we need. I begin asking why. If I've got the title wrong, you need to correct me, Stuart. But it is tied to our Self-Reg Summer Symposium, which is number 9. It's July 4th to 6th. For those of you watching this before that date, you can still join. Come, come to Peterborough. We promise the snow, the smog, the smoke should be gone by then. It's a beautiful place to spend 3 days with an amazing group of like-hearted humans. Trying to figure out how to help kids and youth and ourselves and our world and all those good things. But you can also participate online. And if you are watching this after the date, there's still access to many of the talks. So be sure to check us out or join us for what next year is our 10th annual. So that's going to be a big one. We got to start thinking about what we're going to do for that. So you wrote this blog, though, and in this blog, you start out with the line that basically says that is what this whole summer symposium 3-day theme is really about. And it has all your talks, all my talks, but there's about 30 other people contributing in different ways. And the title of the symposium is Co-Reg with Dysregulated Kids. What do we do as self-reggers? How do we begin to think about that? So what made you want to write this blog, Stuart?
Well, you'll remember a couple of weeks ago, there was a school in Mississauga that was in the news. A teacher had sent a letter that really circulated around the country. It's a middle school and it's out of control. And the teacher was essentially begging the Peel School Board for help uh, and described how, we live in fear, uh, that there's some pretty worrying things going on there. For example, kids were smearing their feces on the walls. Now, that is something that I am more than familiar with. It's a very common behavior. It's called scotology. That's the technical term. or scalati. It's smearing. You see, you have to deal with it quite a lot in kids on the spectrum, and you know, it really brought home to me, and I thought it would be a good idea for you and I to talk about this. Why Self-Reg talks about asking why, and why trying to get to the source of these problems is not some sort of permissive a permissive approach. Well, it was just a stress behavior. So I thought this would be a good topic for you and I to talk about, and I will lecture on it in July.
Every time you say lecture, I hear is Stuart's the most engaging speaker ever. So, it's interesting because you didn't tell me that you had read that letter, and I read it online as well. So I just want to take one more moment and think about some of those other behaviors. So for those of you going, okay, that doesn't happen in my school or my early childhood center. And by the way, that can be tied to trauma. And there's all sorts of things that can be tied to as well. Uh, but this letter had a lot of other stuff in it. So give that maybe people can relate to. So can you give some other examples that you recall off the top of your head of some of the things they were dealing with?
Yeah, the kids had become, they were fighting, shouting. There's a lot of aggression. And the thing that struck me when I was reading it was it was a teacher who wrote that letter. Uh, and she kept on saying, she repeated the same line several times, that kids are out of control. And that's what really struck me, because, of course, what she was, or he, I don't know if I don't know who it was. What the teacher was asking for was for the school board to come and regain control. That we're looking at this as as this is what happens when you don't impose strict regulations, whatever. And it's the perfect topic for self-reg, not just because and you're right, this is an extreme case, but I think all of us, we're hearing from schools across Canada, but around the world, that are seeing an increase in what they regard as out of control behavior.
Yeah. It's
So
not just school, Stuart, it's the early childhood.
early childhood parents, exactly, yeah.
And the thing I remember about that letter, I mean, it was a call for help, by the way. And so, when you read for the educators, and I think some of the things I'm hearing, these are more common than you think. Absolute defiance, bullying, all kinds of behaviors that we wouldn't consider acceptable or okay happening. And it also had this underlying tone of educators not feeling safe, but most feeling that there was that you could tell you're saying it, but I really felt that there was this feeling that the administrators, whoever they are, were going soft on kids. Everything was like, oh, no problem, and because of that, things were absolutely wild and out of control. And it is not as uncommon. We hear that a lot. A lot of places we visit, you'll have people that really just want, I don't know if that's what this teacher wanted or not, but would like the principals to start suspending more, to, these kinds of things, to just clamp down and look at it as going too soft on kids. So it's actually a really great letter. We'll make sure that we find a way to link it, because it's public. It was on Twitter that I saw it. So, all right, where do you want to take us? And so that's what sparked it. And interesting, I read the blog. But I did not know that was the letter you were referencing. So very cool. I find things out in the moment with you always.
Okay, so as self-regulars, we are taught that we're always going to ask why. And when we ask why, it's because We really want to get to the heart of the problem. We really want to help these kids, help that school, help that teacher. And you can't do that if you don't ask why, where the why, what we're looking at, is going deep inside the brain. If we do something like that no some sort of a no tolerance approach, zero tolerance approach, we haven't touched the problem. We haven't touched what's going on that would have produced this. So, in no way is the self-reg reframing that we're going to talk about today, and that is distinguishing between misbehavior and stress behavior and what is causing the stress behavior. That is not a recipe for saying that we're not going to restore however we can order and calmness. Now, before we get on to the why, I just want to explain a very important point. Um, so at our clinic at Mary, it was primarily for kids on the spectrum. And we had to have all kinds of rules. We had to have rules that were intended for the safety of our therapists, rules for the safety of the kids, rules for the safety of the parents. But the rules were explained to children in a very gentle, soft voice. And so let's take as an example, you weren't allowed to hit, you weren't allowed to bite, but you would never, ever raise your voice or be harsh when if a child was starting to hit, and you would very gently explain that we don't hit. We would lower the temperature, and the same is true of I'll give as another example. I have a 21-year-old son who's on the spectrum, and to this day, I'm always I had to do this last night, explaining rules, but always gently, always in a soft voice. And what you'll notice is that the kids really do have a desire to please you. All children do. They don't want to. They don't want to upset adults or their parents or anyone. And so if we're gentle in the way we explain and follow the rules, they will process it and they will respond accordingly. So that's a starting point before we get to why. And I know you agree with all that.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'll add in, I probably have more to add, but I want to wait to see what you have to share, is that if you're listening, it's like, yeah, how am I going to be gentle? There's, there's absolute chaos around me, or as a parent in my home. And another way that still is gentle, but it's a different way of thinking of it, is that you can say no. Boundaries are okay. You have to think about power and who decides, and all of those. There's all sorts of things that can go into that developing of the boundaries. But if you were to ask my daughter, who is the strictest parent of all her friends, I actually think she'd say me, because she has told me many times she has a lot of freedom and a lot of independence. But I'm very engaged constantly, actually, and then I'm always looking for ways to back myself out. When she doesn't need me, I get out of there. That's sort of how I see my role. But I can say no, I can set boundaries. I can but it's always with love. And sometimes I literally use that word. I know that this is really disappointing and you don't like that answer, or but this is my, I'm setting this up because I'm doing this with love. Or, hey, we don't hit, you don't great, that, but that's not who you are. See how it is still setting boundaries, but there's this love And I know that can be a scary word to say when you're thinking of your educators, or you're worried about your,
Kindness.
but use a word that feels right to you. I'm very comfortable saying it's done with love. Parenting and saying, or teaching, or early childhood educating, and just saying yes, yes, yes all the time is actually easier. It's not what's right for the children, right? It really and truly isn't. So boundaries are part of self-reg, and that's often missed by people that just get a little surface level of what we do, because we're so human rights and so looking at the heart and believing in the best and trying to understand within the child. Yeah. And we also know that structure is a piece, is a way to reduce stress. So uh, I don't know if you want to respond or just keep on going, Stuart.
I want to respond by keeping on going,
Yeah, perfect.
especially for that last remark. Okay, so what Susan just said was what we're looking at is we want to reduce the stress. Now, when we ask why, um, our point is that uh, it's not enough to impose our boundaries however we've done that, because we haven't really addressed what was the cause of these behaviors in the first place. Susan made a very interesting remark a couple of minutes ago. um, uh, so we smearing is something that anyone who works with um, uh, children that are struggling is familiar with. And she's right. There can be many different causes. It can be intestinal. It can be sensory seeking. There are many different reasons. But what we do see is that there are some kids that are vulnerable to this when they are overstressed. And so, in some ways, um, the in some ways, when we're reframing the behavior, what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out what is underlying this kind of chaos that that teacher described, so that we can help these kids change these kids' trajectory. Now, we know that one of the things that children tend to do when they are overstressed in a group situation, think, for example, of a birthday party, is they bounce off each other as a way of recruiting catecholamines, as a way of giving themselves. And so what's happening is they're ramping up each other, and they are getting a shot of uh, norepinephrine or epinephrine, and it kind of escalates. Now there are very complicated reasons about why they have that need in a stressful situation. The party is creating all kinds of social stresses, noise stresses, etc. School is creating all kinds of stresses. And so there's a problem here, that we want, that this is one of the big reasons why we have to have these boundaries, that this can easily become a pattern. It can become entrenched, where they're coming looking for that shot of adrenaline. So we have to calm all that down. But then we have to ask ourselves, because what we're trying to figure out is, why do they need this? They're not misbehaving, and that's a hard thing. That's a hard thing to come to terms with, because we find certain behaviors like smearing. It's very upsetting for us as adults, and we think that this is a really bad. This is really bad, out of control. But really, what it is it's a sign of really deep stress. So let me just emphasize before I say the next thing, that what we're trying to do is, when we're asking why, we want to figure out the cause, so that we can, once we've restored peace, we can begin to address the cause. So we'll get to that in 1 second. Now, our problem here is that the why is telling us that something is happening, that these kids are in an imbalanced state. And we want to know why they're imbalanced. And we want to, is it something, is it something that they're doing, um, a problem with their physical routine, sleep. By the way, lack of sleep is tied to smearing. Is it a sleep problem? Is it eating? Is it that they're doing something maladaptive? Are they spending too much time on? Are they spending too much time on devices? So we're going through all this, and we're gonna work with the parents, um, get them involved as part of the solution, trying to figure out why these kids are not restoring properly. And that's the key. When a child's not restoring properly, that's when they seek catecholamines. That's when they seek a shot of dopamine. Dopamine is a catecholamine. So, in the meantime, this was a mid-school. So we're talking children 11 to 14, roughly. They're old enough for us to teach them everything that Susan and I are talking about today. We want them to learn how to self-regulate in healthy ways. And so what we want to do when we ask why is we're going to flip the situation. Self-control says all we got to do is we're going to do the expulsions, we're going to do suspensions, we're going to impose order. You haven't done anything. If you do that, what you've done is you've reduced your stress as an educator, but you haven't reduced the child's stress. In fact, you may have actually increased it because now you've added fear into the mix. So what we want to do is we want to figure out what, first of all, what are the things that the kids are doing that they're coming into school. And she mentioned that, or he mentioned at one point, that this is from coming in the front doors. Okay, so why? What is going on in these kids' lives? What can they learn about? Can they learn the steps of self-reg so that they learn when they are in imbalance, homeostatic imbalance, what they need to do to restore? This is why we're asking why. This is why we're trying to get to the heart of the problem. So we don't want to confuse two things here. We don't want to confuse. Yes, we have to do something. We have to restore that haven-like environment. And now I'm going to turn it over to Susan, because it seemed to me when I read that letter that what they needed was help on the first step to becoming a haven.
Yeah, and so much there, Stuart. One of the things that I love about Self-Reg, and about all the work that we do, and it's the science that Stuart brings you, but it's also the hope is as we begin to think about what to do with this, we've got to really remember this is not a program. These are not behaviors. I mean, this wasn't one behavior in that letter. There was like a dozen. I read it a few weeks ago, so I don't remember exactly. There were a lot coming from absolutely everywhere. And if we think there's one quick fix or some program or colored coded cards or even a couple of lessons I'm going to do 3 times a week, that's going to fix that. No, it's not. And yet that may be very frustrating. And that frustration is actually a stressor, right? You talk about this even in the article. Frustration and feeling hopelessness are stressors. Self-reg is the hope, but we begin to think about it it's like, I always think of it like an elastic band. With Stuart, we come in and he's always thinking within an individual. But anyone who knows Self-Reg, and if you're new to it, there's lots of ways to learn more. It is never within the individual. That's just a part of the process. It's the whole context. And so what I was left, if you're thinking, oh, that all sounds great, yeah, you come and teach my grade eights. And you're right. Do I go in and just teach about Self-Reg in a grade 8 health class and that fixes everything? No, it's a piece of the puzzle. And what really jumped out to me at this letter was, it made me think of Kathy Lethbridge, and we've got a podcast with her done that I encourage people to listen to. But she took over a school. She went back as a principal this year, so she was doing self-reg at a district level, and then went back as a principal. And the school, she'll be the first to tell you that for sure there were some challenges, but it wasn't this level of a challenging school. But where did she start? By going in and, pummeling people over the head with self-reg on day one? No, right? You were playing the long game, and we have to, because that's just what the science says. And you've got to realize, I mean, some of the things that we're hearing are happening. We're in this crucible of stuff that's happening. I keep hearing about fights with, like, what the crowd is yelling for violence is just like, it's unthinkable. And it's, I've kicked somebody in the head. This kind of stuff is like, it's more and more happening. And it is, so we think at the whole school, at the cultural level, we work at the individual, we look at the team. Jumped out to me right away from this letter was there was no team cohesion. So you got the administrators that have one mindset and one, value based, and one approach, and you've got at least one educator, a group of educators, and there's this, that's all part of it, right? That's all part of it. So yeah, and I just really want everyone to hear that uh, that this is all part of it. Learning the science and thinking about it on the individuals, and thinking about, how do I find those moments to connect? Even the feisty teenager that's telling you off, and they will, by the way, pick your moments. But you finding those moments of connection when what is a rebellious, or you might call defiant, or I try not to use the word respect because we've overused it. And when we go in, but really somebody that teenagers that are doing this and telling you off and all these kinds of things, how do you respond? Every one of those schools has a couple of teachers that don't have the same discipline problems that the other teachers do. And oftentimes you'll hear, assuming they go soft on kids, and it doesn't tend to be that way. It's relationship, it's boundaries, it's expectations, but it's also helping kids see what's possible. Teenagers need that. When Stuart said every one of them wants to please you, hard to swallow because they're also trying to survive and navigating their peers, but it's real and it is in there. And the one, kids that have gotten in trouble their whole lives love learning a little bit of this science, because all of a sudden it's not, they've internalized that they're bad, that there's something broken, that there's something wrong with them. They have, and it's been reinforced every single time. And all of a sudden this is hope. It's like, hey, there's there's some brain-based things going on here. So that's a lot. That's a big sort of jumping off point, but I want people to hear that this is a universal. I like the universal design idea. We're thinking about a couple of kids. We're seeing the signs of clearly, a pressure cooker school, pressure cooker classroom. We got to be working on all kinds of levels. And one of them is definitely understanding the science of what's going on within individuals, but the other is within the group. And that working at both levels is the hope. It really is. And it takes time.
So you said something there that is really where I wanted us to land today. And that is this element of hope. And so I know that there are teachers, educators, parents who have lost that sense of hope. And I wanted to tell you something that I learned one day from one of our therapists at Mary. So we were working with a kid that would become pretty aggressive. And so at the end of one of the sessions, and they'd been working with this family now for a couple of months, and the parents were so dispirited because the session ended, as it must, when the kid became very aggressive. And they said, and then, we meet afterwards just to debrief a little. And they were so low. And the therapist said to them, "Oh, but don't you see how much progress we've made in 2 months?" And the fact was that at the beginning, this kid would become very overstressed. And by the way, when we talk about these as stress behaviors, That would be for a different podcast or a different talk, looking at how excessive stress can lead to this kind of lashing out. There are reasons deep inside the brain. But she said, but this kid at the beginning, it would happen like within a second. And here we had just gone through a session with mom and dad that had lasted close to an hour. That's a long, long time. And she said to them, this is, we're asking an awful lot of him. And look at how far he's come. And all of a sudden, and I'm just sort of sitting there quietly. I'm watching mom and dad, and everything changed. They smiled, they sat up, and they left that office full of hope. We had just given them a shot of dopamine themselves, and that's the message I wanted to give. So whatever the situation is that you are dealing with, whether it's in your family, um, whether it's in your classroom, your school, um, you start doing what Susan said. You will see, sometimes you get so overstressed yourself that it's easy to overlook how much progress you've made even within a week. It does happen. It always happens. There isn't such a thing as a crisis situation that we can't change. And that's the magic of self-reg. The magic of self-reg is it does work. It always works. And it works because of what Susan said. It works because we are understanding, and our own understanding, our own insights are growing with the child's increasing calmness. You can't separate these aspects of the co-regulating relationship.
It's so interesting because you do this with me. Sometimes I have sent you over the years. Most of our communications are by email, so it's actually always really fun to see Stuart on video, because we do a little bit in person. We have our reframe, our resilience course that starts this August. So a little plug in. Come and join me. I'm facilitating the first one, and we've been building it. We're almost done building it right now. So it's really interesting. But we do email and occasionally by a little bit by text, I guess, as well. But sometimes I have hard days, and I'm like, oh, because there are two steps back. There are days in your parenting when all yesterday I went to film another podcast and I couldn't find the cord for my laptop because my kid my good laptop, because my daughter had it, and which has been a conversation multiple times and so frustrating, So was I the cool self-reg parent? Oh, I did it with no. I was frustrated because where's my cord kind of thing, right? And she was at school, so it's always this momentum moving forward. But that's what you always respond to me. It's like, look back and see how far you have come, and how far we've come, and it's a momentum forward, right? So it's a really interesting um, piece of the puzzle, and important when we think about co-reg, which is part of our symposium this year, is whoever wrote that letter, and all of you out there that are feeling like they are, and I see it in all kinds of places in our community and various social media groups I'm with. You're exhausted, and what happens when we're depleted ourselves? Stuart talks about negative bias in lots of our courses, but we, as well as when we think about the Thayer matrix and where our energy and tension are, it's we're really not in the place to be solving this. We're in survival mode ourselves, and look, just deciding, oh, that was a really exciting podcast and I have hope now and I'm going to change this tomorrow. It doesn't work like that, because you don't have enough to, we talk about any calm to lend. It's more than just calm, of course, but it's a really important piece of the puzzle. So at this late stage in the game. I mean, I don't know what you think, Stuart, and I do want to get to your three. You had three really important areas that from your blog that we wanted to talk about, that are sort of going on. But at this stage, especially, like we're in early June, and there's a couple weeks left in school. If you're hearing this in June, it's not the time to start a new plan, right? You know, it really isn't. If you're running on our school year like we do in Canada here, your summer's coming. It's a chance to restore, get grounded again. If you're a leader thinking towards next year, because really the place that we have to start. I mean, Stuart talks about self-reg is always personal, is with ourselves. So I don't know what you want to say about that and where you want to take us next, Stuart.
I think what I'd like to do is I think we should think about closing today's podcast because I have one last thing I wanted to say. And maybe our next podcast we can talk about the three things that really deserve a topic of their own.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good one for thinking forward to next year as well. So,
But what I really wanted to end today by saying was a thank you. I wanted to say a thank you to that teacher. It took courage and honesty. Uh, you know, it's hard for us to ask for help, especially when we're in a position where we're supposed to be, in control of the situation. And I was so grateful that the teacher, whoever that teacher um, was was able to bring this to light. And for me, it was just it was a moving experience to suddenly realize something that I can take for granted. And that is the stresses, the demands that our teachers are being asked to deal with. But it's exciting for me too because I realize that we can help. We have, that was the point of this podcast today. That's what this teacher has sparked. All kinds of thoughts, all kinds of, a deep desire in both of us to chip in, to do what we can. And I loved what Susan said about how there has to be this team between the administrators and the school administrators, the board administrators, the teachers. I want to be a part of that team. I want them to include me.
whatever you are feeling, educators, it really is what a time it is in education, and early childhood educators, the people who have given their lives. I mean, you've chosen the career to work as a profession to work with children and youth. uh, I don't care what anyone says, nobody chooses that profession. Well, they're not choosing it for the bucks. We're trying to make a difference. And do some of us have different viewpoints? What makes a difference? Yeah. Is there space for those viewpoints? There has to be. There really does. And understanding that wherever we lift others up, we are helping. And it's just such an important thing. So I agree, and I want to validate what whoever wrote that. There wasn't this underlying, it was throwing muck, if you will, kind of sense. It was an attempt to be, I guess, what you might call factual or just very specific, but it was definitely a plea for help. The leaders in that school, just what do you feel like when a letter like that goes out? It can't feel great, but those leaders have chosen that profession and are trying to find their way through a really messy time in our world, in our communities, our families, and in education. It really is. So those of you out there that would love to see change in all kinds of different areas, we all feel that way. How do we move forward? And we do it through unity. And the thing that Self-Reg does, in my opinion, one of the things that Self-Reg is key for, I find that people will come and they like Self-Reg and they like certain elements of it, and then they're off to get a program. If the program actually works, you could explain it as being step 3 of self-reg and reducing stress, for example, right? But the problem is when we're looking for these external ways or some external expert to come in and fix it, it just doesn't work that way. It is about each one of us at the universal level, every single relationship in front of us. And it's one conversation at a time, one response at a time. You mess it up, oh, oops, you say that, and then try to jig and jag and learn from it. But the science is the key. And so when we learn self-reg and we learn with Stuart, we begin to understand why, which is what we started with today. Why? And we've got to know we won't always get an answer to that question. And I can't just ask the child why. They'll make you the answers and they'll be totally wrong. But it's like when we look at a toddler or we look at our 90-year-old, I have a 92-year-old great aunt and she gets a little cranky. It's like, oh, I know she needs to sleep. It's not actually that different from teenagers and from all of us, right? And so beginning to think why, but it's that knowing that there are, I like thinking of the smartwatch that imagine you could see inside the brain and body. There's more going on. This is not all executive function and choice and these things that we think it is. There's something more going on, and that's hopeful, because what it does is it calls us to begin to consider what do we do about it is what matters. It really is. It has to start with reframing. That's step 1. It has to start with understanding there's more, and we try to understand as best we can. And looking at a couple specifically is super helpful. And you're like, oh, I got 32. Yeah, you got 32, but you learned from 2, and you can see the signs of the pressure building. What do we do? How do we respond? And there are a million different hows, but it's coming at that with this new approach, and you're moving through it in time, and gradually you begin to see the light on the other end of the tunnel.
Okay, can I get you to do one last thing today?
Yes.
Okay, hang on a second.
You're my boss. I do what you tell me.
Okay, so I want you to tell everyone on this podcast that we can help you now chart a path forward. And so can you just briefly mention for those who are listening and want to know where they start, how you have designed streams?
Yeah. Well, Stuart, for those of you listening to the audio version, I've never seen him do that. So that's quite an honor. He pulled one of his many books off his shelf, and it's the one that Stuart and I wrote together. So Self-Reg Schools, it's a handbook for educators. And it really is, that's really what the focus was pulling together. There's some science in it. There's some content that along that line for sure, and there's like it explains self-reg and all of those things, but mostly it's a how to move the path forward, and there isn't one way, and that's really important. It's why we work with so many diverse cultures and communities, because how you take self-reg at an individual level as a process, but also how you take it as a framework and apply it looks different in different places. So there's 4 streams. I'll just tell you, there's lots of ways to learn more. We have an online course, Self-Reg School, Self-Reg Leadership course, which anybody can take. It's not just school leaders, is one of our courses, but there's lots of ways you can learn more. But seeds means, okay, I'm really interested in this self-reg stuff. You've sparked my interest, or you validated that. I love that one. I always felt like this. I always felt there was more going on, and you validated, and you've given me a bit of science and a bit of courage to realize I'm not, whatever. So it could be I run a book club. Okay, we get that book, or you get one of the ones behind Stuart. He's got Reframed, and he's got Self-Reggers parenting book, for example, there. And you run a book club, or you take a course with the MEHRIT Centre and try the early childhood development course. Is terrific for anybody that's in not just early years, but if you're in inclusion in any kind of way. It's a really terrific course for that. But you learn a little bit more. You try to sprinkle some things. Maybe you do something in your environment, remove some of the clutter or the loud visual noise everywhere, or you begin to think about, okay, how can I have a few less transitions so that I don't have so many points of tension every time I make them line up. One of the easy ways is stop lining up so many times a day, kind of thing, right? But so there's seats, and the sunrise is a little bit more organized. Sometimes it's a couple of people, a principal and 2 teachers. an early childhood coordinator and a couple of her staff that are really interested in. You learn a little bit more, you try a little project in some kind of ways. Sometimes in schools it'll be just one or two classrooms that are, the coalition of the willing, I like to call it, people that are interested. The quilt is a stream for pulling self-reg together as a chunk alongside other areas. So you're doing mental health, or you're doing safe schools, or you're doing restorative practice or justice, or any of those would fit. You're working on curriculum. You're trying to improve. You're looking at math, and you're looking at math anxiety. So self-reg gets pieced together as part of the quilt. And we have people in all those different places in the journey, and it's not as linear as it sounds, but they're working on it in different ways. And then we have Haven, which is really our dream, and it really is. It is a shift in how we not just see, but how we feel and how we are. People say that once they learn self-reg, they can't unsee it. So it's not this perfect space you're going to go and visit. Uh, I have a Haven. I'm definite Haven oriented in my home. It doesn't mean my home is perfect, but I'm trying to it's literally trying to infuse self-reg into everything we do. Many self-reggers said, thank God for self-reg during COVID, because it helped them deal with so many, you begin to it just happens naturally. You're not trying quite as hard to use those five, but it can apply in a school too. And again, it doesn't mean it's perfect. It doesn't mean you don't see self-control. It doesn't mean you don't have people that wish there was more suspensions, right? Or it doesn't mean any of those things. It means that everything you do, you infuse it through a self-reg framework. So you think about, how can we, what are some of the stressors that we can reduce? We're not trying to sugar, makes things easy. It's not about that. It actually is about challenging kids and higher standards and all these things, but they got to be able to manage it. When it's outside of their window of tolerance, we believe them. And what are some of the stresses we can reduce? Just my idea about lining up. When people are saying every time we line up, there's all these problems. So there's stuff you can do about that. But one of the first things is, do we need to line up, right? So how can we reduce some of the stressors? How you start your day, how you end your day, how you deal with difficult things, all of those things. And then we begin to think about recognizing the kids that need a light and stress load. That school was full of people that need light and stress loads. If I was the principal of that school, the last thing I would be doing is calling a whole bunch of extra meetings that I don't need to do at 4 o'clock. Right now those teachers are maxed. How can I minimize it? Where can I reduce the stress just a little bit so they can get through the rest of the year? As an example, right? And then the last two steps of self-reg, sometimes they get looked at. Sometimes people get really excited about the first three, and then the last ones are all great, right? But it's this idea of getting clear is the acronym that Stuart came up with, and Rebecca Leslie helped refine it to turn it from CALR to clear, which we love, but it's calm, listening to embodied awareness and reflection. So how do we really build that? And it's not let's all go deep breathe. Could be a mindfulness program, but it can also be, nature walks and cultivating awe in all kinds of ways. And the kids that you think are never calm, you don't tell them to be calm. You help them notice the moments they are, right? That's a starting place. You're like, I don't know where to start. Look at that. You're so engaged in what you're doing. I had people tell me my kid wasn't motivated in certain things. And I'm like, yeah, you don't know my kid, because last night she saved 4 fish from a friend, got these 4 betas that she's nursing back to health and then going to put them on marketplace and give them away. I did nothing. So don't, that's there's motivation in there. So why and why now, right? So really beginning to understand that, and then restore. That one of the greatest things that I love, that Kathy Lethbridge, who I mentioned earlier, had taught me, it's something really she caught on from Stuart, but the way she phrased it was really game changing for me, because she said, we work so hard on recognizing and reducing stressors, and we can slip back into our IEPs with that. We're going to, we're still, we think we're co-regulating, but we're using that. I'm trying to get him to do a certain thing. As soon as that's my goal, I want to get him to finish this, or I'm using first hand boards or whatever. We're actually outside of self-reg, right? Because what we're trying to do is do that and then get out of the way and see what happens. And then maybe we need to do that some more and, help them see the best in themselves and all that. But she said, is that flip of starting with emphasizing whenever we can. I mean, in Self-Reg, we're trying to get to restore. That's what all the other steps are about. But also, you've got kids, you're peeling them off the wall. Do they need more assemblies being taught? What could we do? What could you do? Stay within all your, regulations and all those things. Then what can I do? What would make a difference right now? How can I bring in even little moments of cohesion, laughter, joy, restoration? Even with teenagers, don't think you can't get there. So it's really starting with that restore. So she would look at the most difficult, challenging, the kids, the revolving door kids for the office, and think, okay, they got nothing that comes anywhere close to restoration. And like, people want to take away their recess. It's like, oh no, never do that. If there's a challenge around it, figure that challenge out as a problem to solve. How can I make it so that they're safe during recess and other kids are safe? Okay. But don't take away recess. We wouldn't take away breaks, right? So how do I get more restoration, not less? So come read the handbook. You can find it on our website or Pearson Education Canada. And I'm really happy that you mentioned that, Stuart. that's what the purpose is. And there's a ton of stories in there, lots of examples, tons of strategies. There's lots of tools, things that you can try, and you figure out what fits for you and where you're at, whether you're a teacher, an early childhood educator, thinking at a school level or anything really. So there you go. Final word is yours, Stuart Shanker.
So TMC works with school boards across Canada. And one of my favorite school boards is the Peel School Board. It's a wonderful school board. They have really taken Self-Reg to heart. And that's ultimately why I am so hopeful for that teacher and why I'm so hopeful for everyone who's listened to us today. So thanks to all.
They're facing so many challenges, like so many of you are. And I mean, we're still showing up, trying to help kids and trying to figure all of this out. So thank you. We would love your feedback. Please share. It's really exciting when our podcast is beginning to grow and being seen and heard from others. Ask your tough questions. Tell us what you would like us to do next. We welcome all of your comments. So take care, everyone, and we'll see you for the next podcast. Bye.